Welcome to Chautauqua People. My name is Ira Cooperman, and it is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome today two very special guests, Maestro Grant Cooper and his wife, Margie Cooper. Grant Cooper is artistic director and conductor of the West VA Symphony Orchestra, among his many titles, and his wife Margie is a violinist and violist, music teacher, orchestral, and chamber musician. Welcome, welcome to Chautauqua People.
Thank you.
We're happy that you could be here today. Our viewers will eventually notice, Grant, that you have a little bit of an accent. Tell us, where were you born?
I was born in Wellington, New Zealand, and I grew up there, went to college or university in Auckland, and because I wanted to become a musician, I realized I had to do my time at my instrument, and we were lucky to have met members of the Cleveland Orchestra and the New York Philharmonic who were on their way to open the Sydney Opera House back in the early 70s. Made contacts with those people, and I came over here January 20th, 1976, and I've lived here ever since.
Wow. You've been in the United States almost 40 years. Are you a citizen now?
I am indeed a citizen.
That's great. Yeah. That's great. And I understand you were very young when you had your first musical performance on an opera stage?
That's right. My mother was an opera singer. She'd sung all through high school and then sang in the professional opera company, the New Zealand National Opera at the time, back in the 50s this was. And she was a soloist for that group, and she did a lot of singing around town, and I was going along for the ride, basically. I had no idea that it was unusual. I figured every kid in the world did this, and made myself a nuisance in the orchestra pit, and eventually got cast into a little child's role on stage. So I was about age 4, I think, when I first sang and acted.
Wow. That's great. Yeah. I started the piano when I was 3, but I can't imagine singing at that age. That's great. And then you studied piano, music theory, trumpet, but in college you graduated from something else, right?
Yeah, well, my dad was a civil engineer, and I figured that I would become a civil engineer too, because I was interested in mathematics and it was a way to use it. It was a very pragmatic approach. The New Zealand education system is very much oriented around academics rather than the arts. And so I continued on my academic track. I figured that I'd go to college to be a mathematician or, as it turns out, an engineer. But then I had this experience playing with other people my own age, early 20s, in a national youth orchestra, and it turned my life around, basically. They said, you can make money playing your trumpet if you move to Auckland, which is the biggest city in New Zealand. Right. So I did that, but I finished my degree in mathematics, which is really what I loved, more so than engineering, and true to their word, I made money a little bit well, playing the trumpet.
Everyone knows math goes with music. You have to understand mathematics, so that's good. But you, Margie, you did graduate with degrees in music, right? You have both a bachelor's and master's degree, is that right?
That's right. I started into a bachelor's of performance, violin performance, and then took my junior year and went to Vienna and became so fascinated with the language and the literature and all of the culture that I came back, finished a Bachelor of Music with an outside field, which was German, and then I started in my first year of master's degree, I started in to do a music history degree, musicology, but absolutely hated it. So I ran back to the violin, switched to a master's in performance in violin, and I also had a minor in viola.
Wow.
So.
How long did you spend in Vienna, Austria, right? Not Vienna, Virginia?
No, not Vienna, Virginia, Vienna, Austria. I spent a year. I spent a year.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, August to August.
That's a wonderful place for music. And you were at Indiana University?
That's right, for both bachelor's and master's.
Oh, that's great. How did you manage to take up the violin in the first place?
Well, it was interesting because I actually took up the piano. And for the longest time, pretty much all the way through high school, I was a better pianist. But here's the thing, just like Grant said, I went to a summer camp, several summer camps, and just being around all these other people in the orchestra and chamber music and things, I realized violin was just more fun. You know, piano's a pretty isolated instrument unless you're maybe lucky enough to have a chamber group or be in an orchestra. So I decided to audition for college on violin.
Very good. And you play the viola also, is that right?
Yes. I have a relatively small viola, so it's possible to make that transition between the two.
Gotcha. Yeah. Grant, well, you started singing at age 4. I believe you switched to an instrument. You became a trumpeter, right?
My uncle was a trumpet player. He played in a dance band, and I just loved the sound of the instrument. I can't tell you why. I begged him, just begged him to give me lessons. And one Christmas, he gave me, under the tree, there was a trumpet.
Wow.
And then he said, but I'm not going to teach you until you've studied the piano first for at least 2 years, which I hated him for, really. But now that I look back on it, it was the best advice I'd ever gotten.
Good foundation, right?
Absolutely. And probably it is one of the reasons why I feel comfortable conducting now, having played the trumpet professionally, but having some piano skills has really helped.
Sure. Where did you perform the trumpet? I know you were a solo trumpet player. I can't say the word, but you played it as a soloist on the trumpet.
Yeah, eventually I did. But at first, the brass band movement in New Zealand was very strong, just like it is in England. And every town, it seemed like, had their own brass band. I came from a little town called Upper Hutt, and we had a municipal band I played in, and had this, like Margie was describing, this ensemble experience, this sense of playing together with other people is very powerful. And it was after playing in that I moved up to Auckland to start making a living as a trumpet player, but continued the degree work.
And at some point you left New Zealand and moved to the United States, or did you go to Europe first?
No, directly to the US. My teacher in New Zealand was an American. He graduated from the Eastman School of Music just up the road here in upstate New York. And it seemed to me that the standard of brass playing was the highest of anywhere in the world in the United States, so it was a relatively easy decision to make. Come here and and be among these incredible young players. That was what was amazing.
Right.
Was young people 17, 18 years of age could do incredible things.
What were some of the orchestras that you played in when you were a trumpet player, when you were principal trumpet, for example?
Yeah, right after I finished my study, I was lucky enough to be invited to go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is where I met Margie. The best decision I ever made. We were both in the orchestra there, we met and were married shortly after that.
Trumpet and violin, that's a strange combination.
Well, her friends gave her a really hard time about that, that's for sure.
I'll bet. How could you go with a trumpet player, right? Something like that?
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, at Indiana University, the trumpet players always practiced upstairs with the windows open, and everybody just couldn't. So when I announced to my friends that I was marrying a trumpet player, I was made severe fun of.
Yeah, either that or persona non grata.
Yeah.
But anyway, you did get a chance to play in the United States with Tulsa and some problems.
And I'd gone to Tanglewood and played with some really amazing conductors. But what I discovered very quickly in the orchestra world was that when you're in an orchestra, you are in an ensemble and you have to be there when the orchestra's playing.
Right.
And I had some other opportunities as a soloist, as a chamber musician, that I wanted to be able to explore as well. And I realized that by teaching in a college position, that would give me the opportunity to have flexibility in my schedule. First college position I got was right here in Chautauqua County at Fredonia, SUNY Fredonia.
Really?
It was 1982. So Margie and I moved up there. It was a year after we got married. And we've been in Chautauqua County in one way or another since that time.
Well, Chautauqua County is really lucky that you guys got that first job at Fredonia. And you still are connected with Fredonia. I know you're artistic director of the Bach and Beyond Festival.
That's held at the 1891 Fredonia Opera House. When that opera house was first refurbished, it had been a vaudeville theater, it had been a movie theater, and it was in disuse. It was going to be demolished.
Right.
But some local citizens decided to try to refurbish it, and when they did, they wanted events in there that didn't duplicate what was happening at the college. And I'd been conducting a chamber orchestra at the college at the time, and they invited me to come in and suggest something.
Wow.
And the idea of Bach and Beyond was born, and we just finished our 19th year of doing that. It's 20 years of the Opera House, 19 years of Bach and Beyond.
That's great. That's really wonderful. And I'm so glad that the Fredonia Opera House is in use. I mean, we've seen Mark Russell perform there. We've seen other performances there. It's a beautiful old building. It's nice to keep things like that around. So was Fredonia the first place that you started teaching in the United States then? And is that where you began doing some
I'd always
conducting?
been interested in teaching, I think partly because when one's thinking about mathematics, one's thinking about structures and the way certain elements react with each other. And that's, teaching is like that too, trying to find ways to connect seemingly disparate bodies of knowledge together so that people have that's what understanding is, I think.
Sure.
Getting a breadth of connection. So I'd always been really interested in teaching, and going to Fredonia was an opportunity initially just to teach the trumpet. But in the 80s, SUNY was going through a terrible budget crunch, and they were unable to replace anybody who left. Rather than let people go from the faculty, they tended to have other people from the faculty, no matter what their specialty, try to cover what was missing.
Sure.
A conductor left, and that was that was in 1983, 1 year into it, and I've not looked back.
I bet they didn't know what the expression cover conductor meant. You became a cover conductor without an orchestra, probably, but that's really interesting. And is that when you first started using the baton?
I guess it was, actually. And I'm actually kind of proud of the fact that I never grew up wanting to be a conductor. It was not my artistic or career goal to conduct. But it wasn't just because I was there at the right place at the right time, because that's a very important part of any success that anybody has in any field, I think. But it was also the fact that I played a lot of chamber music, and I felt that my colleagues respected my method of approaching solving musical problems, as one does in a chamber ensemble with no conductor. One discusses these things. So speaking to your colleagues in a way that respects them and understands their musical point of view as well as your own, all of those sorts of things were helpful on the podium as well.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about the use of the baton. I asked you to bring it here today because it is a unique instrument, if you will, that no other musician uses except a conductor.
It makes no sound at all.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting device. It can be thought of as an extension of the arm, I suppose.
Right.
And so it's possible to, with relatively small gestures at the shoulder and at the elbow and the hand even, to magnify, amplify, if you will, the gesture through the stick. And the stick itself can be very suggestive of the style of playing, from very crisp and clear to very flowing gestures. And it doesn't take actually very much motion. I'm only moving through about 12 inches here in any given direction to create a clear sense of sostenuto or legato or connection in the music. And here I go out to 2.5 feet, and if you go the full range, there's an enormous amount of...
You're looking for something something louder, something, whatever it is.
Or even more sonorous.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So we show a lot with the stick. It's
interesting. Margie, as an orchestral musician, obviously you play when either Grant conducts or another conductor conducts. How does the baton affect you as a violinist?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, it's showing the entire orchestra how to play together, although of course we've talked about this a lot, that if people are not taking the rhythm internally and sort of figuring out where they need to be and listening to their colleagues and figuring out how to play together, the stick can't necessarily keep people together. But you know, that it's just really what makes things work up on the podium. And some people, you know, some people are clearer than other people.
Some conductors, you mean?
Some conductors, excuse me, I should have qualified that. Some conductors are clearer than other conductors, but in a professional orchestra, especially like the Chautauqua Symphony, the West Virginia Symphony, you know, we can usually figure out how to work with just about anyone. So,
and a lot of it isn't analytical either. I think when a given player sees a given conductor on the podium, there's a lot of peripheral sensibility that comes out of what's going on, and there's no one gesture that means one thing for every conductor. There's no. It's the package that really counts, I think. And the idea is to create a sense of trust between the conductor and the players. But what Margie was saying is so important. You know, that one can be very clear as a conductor, but there's very little value in saying, well, I could get a deaf orchestra to play together because my technique is so good. Because what you're really trying to do is invite people to listen. Because it's truly through listening that people play together.
Right. And there are some conductors that don't use a baton at all, or that use a baton some of the time and just use their hands some of the time. I don't suppose it really matters a great deal, does it?
I think so long as one's musical intent is clear through the gestures, it doesn't matter at all whether it's a baton or not. And I think for some people, the fingers, the hands, they can mold the sound in certain ways. On the other hand, with a stick, you can do some of that too, you know, and it's even possible to move stuff around and invisibly or imperceptibly just go between the two. So
no, I've seen you do that as a conductor. I think that's that is wonderful. And I know when you went from Fredonia to Ithaca College, where you also taught conducting and taught other subjects as well. How did you get your first start as a resident conductor of an orchestra?
Well, the truth, the smarmy truth, is that there are certain points in your life when one has options and certain points when one doesn't have.
Right.
And in the academic career, tenure is one of those points.
Mm-hmm.
And I had actually applied for a job with the Syracuse Symphony Orchestra out of Fredonia.
Right.
I did not happen to get it on the first try. But immediately after getting tenure at Ithaca College, which was a lot closer, only an hour away,
Right.
I suddenly had this opportunity to apply again. And so I was in a very good position to be able to say to the dean, not could I, may I possibly try to add this into my schedule,
Right.
but this is the way I can make this work. Would you
Sure.
support me in trying to see if it will work or not? And the big difference was I had tenure
Right.
at Ithaca College, and I was able then to say, this is my plan, and present it in a positive way, rather than...
Right. And it was a feather in the cap of Ithaca College to be able to say they had a conductor of the Syracuse Symphony on their staff.
Well, and I can also say that I improved by leaps and bounds, because I was conducting 4 or 5 times a week at Ithaca College, which is a lot,
Yeah.
but then I was conducting 6 or 7 times a week in addition at Syracuse,
Right.
with really high standard of performer,
Right.
and covering a lot of repertoire with international soloists. It was an enormous amount
Right.
of great experience for me. I learned so much, and I think I brought that back to my teaching.
Living in the Utica, I've been fortunate to hear many of your performances.
They are still broadcasting
as a conductor.
them,
They're
yes,
still
right.
broadcasting them on WCNY FM, the radio station in Syracuse. It's amazing. Yeah, they go back many years. You were there, what, about 10 years in Syracuse?
I was on the staff for 10 years, and I guess conducted there a few years after that, until unfortunately the orchestra folded just a few years ago.
Yes, it's become something else, that's for sure. One of the things I don't understand is you were a resident conductor at Syracuse. You've been at the West Virginia Symphony as an artistic director, conductor, also a composer. I just don't understand how you also manage to fit into your schedule all the things that you do. The Bach and Beyond Festival in Fredonia, you're a resident conductor of the Eastern Music Festival in Greensboro, North Carolina, and of course you're the ballet conductor of the Chautauqua Symphony, and you compose music on the side, right? I mean, how do you manage to do all these things?
Well, Margie is probably the one that can answer that. But you can only be in one place at a time, Ira, right?
Right.
And there's no getting around that, and you walk by putting one foot in front of the other. And I think if one becomes busy, and I enjoy being busy, that's for sure, Margie will attest to that,
Right.
to me it's sustenance. It makes me feel full and fulfilled by being in so many different aspects of music. And each one of them, although each one of them is a musical, you left out digital music editing as well.
Oh,
It's something that I
okay.
enjoy doing. I put together radio broadcasts and so forth. It's just exercising a different part of my mind, but also my musical mind as well. So everything feeds into the other. Composing, that was something that I came to quite naturally because my high school music teacher didn't tell me it was hard. They didn't tell me that if you're going to be a composer, you can't be a conductor, or vice versa.
Right.
So just having those kinds of people around me that were suggesting that I could do something meant I could.
That's great.
Yeah.
And I know one of the things that you're really proud of doing, especially with the West Virginia Symphony Orchestra, is some of the educational efforts that you're involved in with is it children and teachers, students and teachers throughout West Virginia?
Yeah, over the last 40 years or so, I've done a lot of concerts for young people, and typically we approach these concerts as trying to teach young people about music. But in the last 4 or 5 years in West Virginia, we've found ways to integrate a musical way of thinking, which is to say an artistic way of thinking, into learning in any subject at all. And it turns out to be a really powerful way to use the artistic experience as by getting students and teachers involved in thinking creatively about their subject.
Even learning about mathematics?
Well, even mathematics. Yeah, I mean, you take a simple little idea of the story of the 3 little pigs, and we know that one little pig builds his house of bricks.
Right.
So what if we designed a house and we measured the area of the walls, and we figured out what the area of each brick would be? How many bricks would we need to order in order to build a house? Actually,
Right.
that's algebra.
Right.
But it's disguised. And it's particularly effective if they've just come from English class, say, and they're doing a creative writing story on the 3 Little Pigs story, but with some little twist to it. They love English.
Sure.
They hate math, right?
Right.
They come from their English class, yeah, 3 Little Pigs, this rocks, you know, I really love this stuff. And they go into their math class, oh, here's math again, but it's about the 3 Little Pigs. They're disarmed. Their defense mechanism, oh, I don't like math, has gone away. And in fact, they're being asked by the teacher to think of ways to use math to create some aspect of the story of Three Little Pigs. And it's amazingly effective.
That's great. That's really great. Margie, I know that you also have a busy schedule, especially this week with performing with the Chautauqua Symphony and also teaching. What are some of the orchestras that you're either currently in or have recently been performing as a violinist?
Well, the West Virginia Symphony, for sure. And I was assistant concertmaster of a chamber orchestra up in Ohio, which I finally had to give up because it was just too much with all of the teaching. I have about 40 students, which is really a full-time job by itself.
Sure.
So symphony weeks with West Virginia get to be pretty hectic. And as you know, the schedule here is really, really busy. Before that, I was in the Syracuse Symphony, and I played in the Buffalo Philharmonic and several chamber orchestras around Fredonia and around Buffalo.
Right, and the Erie Philharmonic
Erie
too?
Philharmonic, yep.
Can't leave Erie out.
That was one of those situations where we moved to Fredonia, and I was trying to let various personnel managers know that I was in town and, you know.
Available.
And, oh, well, we don't really need any violinists, but I also play viola. Oh, are you available next week?
Right,
you know,
right.
so that turned out to be
That's
a really
cool.
good thing to have in my back pocket.
That's good. And you're about to add to your teaching duties in the fall. I understand you're going to become a member of the faculty at West Virginia University. Is that right?
That's right. I did a year there when a colleague of mine took a year's leave. I spent the full year there in 2006, 2007. And I think because everyone knew me from that year, when the current teacher decided to go on sabbatic this coming spring, I guess they felt I was a pretty obvious choice because I knew the ropes, knew
some people in the faculty maybe and things like that. That's great.
So it's a really full-time job now. This particular teacher has built a big studio and a really great scene there. So it's exciting. I'm really excited.
But there is a problem with it, isn't there?
There is.
You're going to be in Morgantown, and your husband's going to be in Charleston.
He could come to Morgantown. Sure. Well, it's only 3 hours.
I told you we'd get to the fun part of it.
Yeah, I know. When we start throwing things. You know.
No, how many hours is it?
It's about 3 hours.
3 hours
I
drive?
actually have a really wonderful living situation. There's a family that built a mother-in-law cottage.
Gotcha.
They live on Cheat Lake, which is between Morgantown and Deep Creek Lake. And it's this beautiful mother-in-law cottage that mother-in-law isn't living in for some reason.
Sure.
So I'll have the whole cottage to myself.
Great.
And so that means if he wants to come up and spend some serious time working there when he doesn't have to be in Charleston, it should work.
No, that's very nice. That's
Yeah.
very. Do you guys like living in West Virginia? I know you've been there now for about 14 years.
Yes, this
really-
is
you
the
like
beginning of my 14th season with the orchestra. We've lived there permanently for the last 11 or 12 of those years. We love it. It's an incredibly kind and friendly place to live. If the light changes and no one moves, no one honks their horn. People let you in on the road. I mean, it's amazing.
It's not like New York.
Not like New York at all.
In fact, it's always that, because both our daughters are in New York, that jarring sense of, oh my gosh, you know, when you're trying to drive around New York City and everyone's just honking to honk.
Right.
You know, no one in West Virginia really honks.
That's great.
They're just so polite.
That's
And,
really
and the
nice.
state is very beautiful. It's mountainous.
It is, isn't it?
Very green in the summer and lots of water activities.
Yeah. And you've just, it was last year you completed your 600th performance with the West Virginia Symphony.
I am
That's great.
close to 650 now. That's right.
650.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a lot of people that we've played for, and it's very rewarding.
Can you think of any particular performance that was especially rewarding? Something that you got a chance maybe to perform one of your own compositions, or some very special composition of some other composer?
Yeah, people ask me often what's my favorite piece, and I always say the same thing: the piece I'm conducting at the moment.
Of course.
And no matter what the event is, I think if you've chosen the repertoire wisely, it can be very effective. So last June 20th was the sesquicentennial of the state of West Virginia. So the orchestra played a concert out on the state capitol lawn, which was really well received. And we played some arrangements I'd made at West Virginia Hills and other West Virginia. Lincoln Portrait was part of it, because of course Lincoln was president during the time that West Virginia became a state.
That's great.
So that was really rewarding. But we've done some amazing music in our concert hall. It's a wonderful hall, and our audience, like all West Virginians, is really supportive of us. And
It's
some really extraordinary music making.
how many people can fit into your concert hall?
It's a new hall which is relatively modest in size, which is good. So we utilize a setting that has about 1,400 seats
Wow.
for a performance.
It is small compared to some of halls here in Buffalo and in Rochester.
Right,
you know.
but there's an
It's fine.
immediacy to the sound, an intimacy to the
Yeah.
performance that is really compelling, I think, both for audience and
That's
orchestra.
great. That's great. Margie, a moment ago you mentioned your daughters. You have 2 daughters, right?
2 daughters, yep.
And are they both living in New York State?
Both in New York State. We have our younger daughter, who's going to be 27 soon, is a midwife, nurse midwife.
Wow.
She works at a hospital in Elmira, New York, which is near Binghamton, center of the state. And then our older daughter works as a consultant and project manager for a big company that does big, huge projects. She lives in New York City.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Have you guys become grandparents yet?
No, not yet. We're waiting.
Well, it'll happen, I'm sure, and it's always a lot of fun when it does happen. Grant, what are some of your future plans? I know you will, of course, go back to West Virginia for the West Virginia Symphony, and you do conduct every summer here at Chautauqua. But in addition, where are some of the other places that you're going to be maybe guest conducting this coming year?
There's a combination of relationships that you build over many years where you're going back on a somewhat regular basis, and new opportunities too that are always exciting to explore. In October, for example, I do something which is very unusual for conductors, which is to go back and conduct the orchestra that I actually started playing in.
Wow.
The Tulsa Philharmonic was the name of the orchestra then. It has gone through a name change. It's now called the Tulsa Symphony Orchestra. But I'm really looking forward to doing
Sure.
that. There are actually a couple of people in the orchestra that were in the orchestra at the time
Still
that Margie
there.
and I played. That's right. And the very next week I fly on to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and open their season with a performance of Beethoven's Ninth. That's
Great.
always nice to go back to Albuquerque, and I've developed a
Beethoven's
nice
Ninth
relationship
is
there.
a very special composition. Sure, that's wonderful.
And the Balloon Fest is going on there in October, as it does. So
I've seen pictures of that.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's quite extraordinary. And then another return visit to Pasadena in December,
Pasadena, California.
California, and we'll actually use that as a stepping stone to go down to New Zealand to visit my family for the holidays. Margie and I will go to that.
And that's not right around the corner, right? How long does it take to fly to New Zealand?
You get on the plane, and from the time it takes off to the time it lands is about 12 hours.
Wow.
So
That's from LA.
from LA,
Right.
right. So I have a routine with that. And I'm going back to Rochester Philharmonic too in February. I'll be conducting a week
Are you really?
of concerts in Rochester.
Oh, you didn't tell me that before. I
Yeah.
definitely will talk about dates because I would love to see you in Rochester. It's only a couple hours from me where I live, so that'd be great. Well, it's really wonderful having you both here. You know, we get a chance to talk at Chautauqua a lot, but to be on camera like this and to have a recording which hopefully a lot of people will see is really wonderful. And so I want to thank you both for taking time to be on Chautauqua People. And I just want to say to everybody in the audience, be sure to keep watching. We'll have other interesting people on from time to time. But thank you for watching today, and I will bid you goodbye.